Today's video is a shortened version of a really long one I did for FromTheField.farm, but in this video I'm going to give you guys a fairly comprehensive tour of my homestead, talk about all the different microclimates and things, where I'm planting, and a little bit of the farm plan. But I don't do really long videos on YouTube too often, so the long one will be in From the Field. But in this version, you guys will get a pretty comprehensive tour of my homestead and what I'm planning to do this year. Just starting here in my backyard, when this was the Green City Acres home base, there was a high tunnel here, a big 21 foot wide high tunnel. And now I've converted this area over to 4 23 by 30 inch raised beds. And the soil profile is quite deep because I'm standing on a bunch of 1 inch crush. And it's about 6 inches off the original ground. So I laid down landscape fabric, and then I shoveled, I wheelbarrowed and shoveled 14 metric tons of gravel to do this at my home base. And I love it because in the wetter months, it drains really well. It's nice to walk on. I've got pavers in between so I can walk barefoot everywhere on the homestead. It's clean, and it means that I don't have to do any weeding anywhere except in my garden beds, and I barely have to do weeding there because I add at least 2 inches of compost on these beds each year. So it's a low maintenance site. So we'll go in the greenhouse in a minute, but back here I've got these 4 23 foot raised beds, and I've still got some crops in them. But this is the south aspect. So this is my south here, and you can see I get lots of sun back here year round. So as far as field crops goes, this is the place that I do the earliest stuff that's planted in the ground. But I'm actually planning to I'm going to build a caterpillar tunnel this year that's going to go over these beds. And it's going to be a caterpillar tunnel that goes up in mid-October and it comes down in mid-April, or maybe end of April, early May. And I'm going to build it. It's going to be custom because I don't want it to be too tall so that it shades this. Because when I had the 21 foot wide high tunnel back here, it started around kind of where the corner of this bed is here, and it was about, the height of it was around here. It was about 10.5 feet tall. It shaded the front bed of this greenhouse, so that's not helpful. So what I'm going to do is make sure that whatever goes in here, it's fairly short. Like, it's probably just 6.5 feet tall, and you can see from where I'm standing, you can see my shadow right there. So we're about 10 a.m. right now, and this is actually a good setting for the sun. So actually what I'll probably do today is I've got some extra T-posts around. I'll stick a T-post in the ground here to represent the height that I want that to be, and I'll just observe the shadow on where it goes. So if that shadow comes up a little bit in here, I don't mind, because there's going to be enough ambient light coming down to get on that bed. So a little bit of shadow on there, I don't mind, but I don't want a lot. So it also might mean, like, let's just say, if I observed that it was going to cast too much shadow, then I probably wouldn't do the greenhouse tunnel at all, or the caterpillar tunnel. But I want to, because I'd really love to keep the snow off these beds. It was a bit of a pain in the butt this year. One of the last videos I did on YouTube was harvesting carrots when I had 2 feet of snow back here. Most of the snow is melted right now, but it was a pain in the butt to harvest these carrots. And I'm not a fan of low tunnels so much anymore. It's so much easier to do a caterpillar tunnel. And I even say the same thing with farming, in a market garden. Low tunnels are great. I talked about them for years in my book. They're great, and they're so inexpensive, and they're so easy to start with, but they are a pain in the butt. And if you spend, I think it's somewhere around twice the amount of money, you get a caterpillar tunnel that makes life so much easier. And so I personally find it's the same even with homesteading. And so that's what's going to happen back here. So needless to say, these 4 beds get a lot of production, and they will see rotations. Like, the first seeding will be some carrots in these beds, either under a low tunnel or under this caterpillar tunnel, depending on when I get it up, in early April. and then these beds will be planted in succession very tightly all the way up till the end of the year. Last thing that might go in here is probably a transplant somewhere in September. And again, when we look at the crop plan, I can tell you that exactly. I don't have it with me or know it off by heart. But these beds see a lot of rotation, and we're going to be adding another inch or two of fresh compost to these as soon as I can. Probably not yet. The soil's still a little bit frozen. A little bit. I put my foot on there. A little bit hard, but not too bad. It's starting to soften up. So we'll add compost to those soon. All my cannabis this year is going to go in this area. So last year I did it in my garden beds, which was a drag. The plants get way too big, and then they take up a lot of productive vegetable space. So I don't want that. You can still even see some of the stalks. These puppies were massive. So this year they're actually going to go in these beds kind of between these main sort of perennial fruiting trees and shrubs that I've got in here. We're going to do more sort of perennial herbs in here as well. But you know, it's all edible stuff. So yeah, the cannabis will go in between, and my hope is that by late or midsummer that this has got a lot of shade in here, a lot of foliage. Two other things to point out back here is I've also made these short beds. They're only 1 foot wide, and they're not as high raised off the ground as these ones, but they don't need to be. And this is where I'm doing some espaliered fruit. So we've got some, I believe this is a pear. Yeah, that's an Asian pear. And so I've built this trellising system that I'm pretty excited about, using aircraft cable, all tensioned wired along this really strong fence that I've built. And so I've got an Asian pear here. This one here is a Honeycrisp apple, and then I've got another pear here, I believe. Oh, another Fuji apple. And so these are all going to be espaliered, and that means that they grow. As they grow, I train them along these wires, and then even when this gets to the top, you basically take the entire top and you bend it over one way. And so the whole idea is that these just fill up these trellises, and that's where that fruit's going to go. Over on the other side, I did the same thing. I haven't finished this trellis system here yet, but I've got all the materials, and be one of the things that I do probably mid-spring. No need to rush it really. But here I've got some more raspberries and 3 more grapes, golden raspberries. I just love them. We have a bunch in the front yard, and I wish I would have had more. So this idea here is western sun comes this way. Grapes love heat. And so this is going to be an intense heat microclimate for them in the afternoon. So I imagine they'll thrive here. The other thing I can do here is, because this trellis system is going to be going in here just the same as over there, I'll be able to do things like cucumbers and squashes and melons trellised here in between the areas of the vines and the raspberries and the fruit trees, because they're not going to take up that much space yet. So I'll be able to kind of interplant a lot in there. Over the next few years, until these trees get, to the point where they're taking up a lot of space, I'll be able to use these beds for all kinds of stuff. So I got my first load of compost. I've already begun, even though it's -3 Celsius out here right now. It's getting sunnier more consistently. The greenhouse is warm. And so I've already started adding compost to my beds inside of the greenhouse. So there's not a lot of action going on in the greenhouse right now, but it's warm in here. Like, it's already, when I started this in the morning, it was 20 in here. It's probably over that already. But yeah, it's already 25 degrees in here. So things are warming up. So in this greenhouse, I've got this one long bed that's about 49 feet to be exact, 30 inches, and it's very deep. I've got citruses in here. I had some problems with my citrus this year, just a lot of scale and aphids, and so I've pruned some of them back. But I've got a lot of area for vegetables in here. That's a fig tree down there. So this will be some of the first places that I'm direct seeding some beets, spinach. I'll put some lettuce transplants in here. There's a whole plan for this. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, what I've done with my farm plan this year is I've segmentized all the beds. I've basically, on the map, have divided them up into 5-foot or 6-foot areas. And that's what I'm succession planning. Just like I would on the farm with bed units, I'm using a smaller unit to succession. That's why when you look at my farm plan, you'll see that this farm plan, as far as the space on the left column of the spreadsheet, can represent any size of unit, right? In this case, I'm using these sort of blocks of where I succession, like a block of lettuce and then another block of lettuce planted 3 weeks later, and so on and so forth. That's how it all works. And then I've also got these 4-foot by 4-foot bed areas that are around the columns of the greenhouse. I've got some lemons and citrus in there, a little bit. I'm actually starting to get some proper lemons, which I'm excited about. But these are also areas that I can plant. That's a passion fruit there that I got from my friend Jane Squire on Salt Spring Island. Got another passion fruit over here as well. But I can still put vegetables in these beds. There's a lot of pots in here right now. This is kind of like my wife's back deck herb garden. All this stuff will go back outside once we're past frosts at night. And actually, one thing I didn't mention is this is where I planted. This is actually turmeric right now that I'm going to be planting up, that I've started. I just went to the grocery store and bought some organic turmeric and started it, and it's doing great. But I've also got the ginger that I planted in the fall in here. That didn't work out because it wasn't worth heating this greenhouse so much. So it kind of died back, but all the roots are still under there, and I've pulled some up and they still look good. So I imagine with enough consistent warm days and nights in this greenhouse that they're going to start coming back, and then I'm going to keep that area not planted with anything and let that ginger come back. So that is what's going on in this greenhouse right now. So I filled up this garden bed with new compost yesterday, and then I will be filling up these beds sooner or later as well. So coming out here into my front yard garden, one quick observation that you can see very easily is that I still get quite a bit of shade, right? So this is, I started shooting this video about 10:30, maybe it's closer to 11 now. And, I still get quite a bit of shade. So that's always taken into consideration in these beds, that not much can happen in here early on. By the time it's April, these are going to be getting full sun. So I don't really do I don't do really any season extension in here. I covered this bed because it was some late carrots, but they're already finished, and that poly doesn't really need to be there anymore. But I did have some later bits there. On this part where I've got sun, it's because the way my house is shaped. There's a little bit less roof there, so more sun comes through here. This was the entire bed of celery I did last year that I didn't even dent. I realized that you can plant way less celery, especially if you just eat off the stalk instead of harvesting the whole stalk. Just pick pieces as you need them, and it's really good as cut and come again. I actually learned that from Vincent Lafleur at Le Jardin de Fumavol in Quebec. They showed me that, and so I've got a plan. I'm going to have a lot of celery this year, but I can plant way less, and I don't need to be harvesting the full head. I just pull off little stalks. Another thing I'm doing this year is I am adding another strawberry bed. So I've talked about strawberries in previous videos on YouTube, and my strategy is I basically dig them all up. So right now I've got 3 beds of strawberries. We're going to be adding another bed, probably just this one. So as soon as it gets warmer, I'll be coming out here and I'll be digging up every single one of these strawberries. I'll be clearing out the entire bed, adding some new fertilizer, adding some new compost on there, and then I'll be replanting them. And as I pull them out, they split up, and so the crown gets a lot bigger, and they also reroot, right? So you could probably 10x your strawberries every year if you do this. I always give away to a lot of gardener friends, but then I'll plant the rest or a bunch more in this bed. So I'll have 4 beds of strawberries this year. And we just realized, like, we ran out of strawberries a little earlier than we wanted. So we're gonna do another bed, and we'll see. I'm kind of tempted to do 2 more beds actually and do one there. And so most of this front yard garden is berries. This is going to be my wife's herb garden again. And then that bed, I forget what's going to go in there. In this bed, maybe I'll just do more strawberries. We'll see. But yeah, so not a ton of action with vegetables up here, but berries and fruit galore. So you might remember last year I did a lot of this verticalization of melons on these trellis units, and it worked very well. The one thing I learned is I was pruning them too much. So what you got to do when you're going to trellis melons is let the main stalk grow, and then they shoot off a runner. You want to let that one runner get a couple flowers on it, then you can cut it. So you have one stalk with a bunch of little runners. What I was doing is pruning everything off and just having one stalk. That was a mistake because I didn't get as much fruit. But I still did get quite a bit of fruit because these grew right up, and I even made these little bridges that brought them over to the main arbor. And I had some watermelons and cantaloupes going along this, which I loved. You can still see some of them dead there, but that worked really well. So I'm going to do that again this year. And the nice thing about that is that this doesn't take up any real estate in the garden bed. So I can still have a very intensive planting plan in these garden beds and have a lot of melons. And I got cantaloupe, watermelon, spaghetti squash, acorn squash, things like that. Get a lot of those, and they don't take up any bed real estate. So it's a win-win. Before we jump in and look at the total farm plan, I just want to explain to you guys a bit about how I'm tracking this, what the basic principles of this sheet that I'm using are, and just kind of like where things are with this whole thing. So first of all, I mean, really basic starters. I use Numbers for Mac, which is just like Excel, but it's just a way of using spreadsheets. And I make these spreadsheets, so there's really nothing to them. I go and I just show you real quick. Like I'll just kind of customize one, and I'll just make the sizes that I want. And then, when you duplicate it one way or the other, you get those little squares. And that's essentially what I have over here. That's more or less what I do. And then I fill in colors. And it's pretty straightforward. I also have imported these images, and I've kind of layered some shapes on them. I just use shapes like up here, and I change the colors, and very, very straightforward stuff there. I guess you gotta have a basic understanding of how to use these spreadsheets in order to do something like this, but it's not complicated. So on this sheet in particular, I have my main plan here, and then on this other page, I have my crop plan, which is actually the starting point, and there's 2 parts of that I'll explain in a second. But just to start with the main plan here, everything is referenced to these 2 maps, and then that all is represented with space on the left column and then time on the right row. So here's the homestead, the main site that we started with, and we walked around here. We also walked around the flagship plot there. And one thing right out of the gate, which you should know, is I talked about it a little bit, but these are these blocks that I have that are my basic unit of production. So just like on my market garden, my basic unit of production was a 50-foot bed, which is kind of like one of these basically. That was my unit of production. And so the beauty of this whole plan is that once you get your head around the basics of how things exist in time and space, and how time, as far as the date to maturity of a crop, changes over time throughout the season, you can apply this farm plan to anything. Like you could look at this, and instead of these being a block in a bed, that could represent a 100-foot bed or a 200-foot bed. It doesn't matter. It could represent a segment of beds. The principles are the same, and that's the beauty of this. And if you want to become a farmer, but maybe you're gardening now, And the further you can get your head around this stuff, then the sooner you can actually start applying these things on a farm scale, because it's really the same principles. So just kind of more about the sheet. So we've got these two reference maps up here. That's the main home base. That's where I live. That's where I do most of my work. That's where we grow a lot of the food. But over here is where we also grow a lot of food as well. And I share this site with Roger and Alen. And they take the lion's share of the stuff because they do the lion's share of the work. I provided the plot of land. It was my connection that got it. All the infrastructure there is mine. All the irrigation, greenhouses, it's all my gear. So we have a basic agreement where we kind of just share the fruits of this. I do some of the work. I come in and I prep everything with the BCS at the beginning of the season. I help do the compost. I help transplanting some things. I do a lot of the growing for things that would go in here as transplants in my nursery here. So that's kind of basically on the logistical side, how things are looking. Down here, I've got these keys, which just represent what is what on these maps. So I've got this little funky looking area here, this little candy cane area. That's my wife's herb garden. And so I've divided the segments in there into more blocks represented by these. There's 20 little segments because, parsley, how much parsley do I need in a season, right? So I just have these smaller areas for the herbs. We also do herbs in pots too, which when we look at our nursery plan, you'll actually see some of that, like some potted here and stuff like that. And then, so yeah, these basic keys just explain what is what. These blocks in the greenhouse are 48 inches by 30 inches. These ones out here are 46 by 30. These ones here are they 46 by 30 as well? Something like that. Yeah, 46 by 30. And that is just so that we could divide the beds up evenly into equal blocks. So, sorry if you can hear my son crying in the background there. But these beds here are 18 feet long. And so I wanted to get, a unit close to the same unit as around here. And so that was fluctuating between 46 and 48 inches. And that's why that's the way that is. And then in my greenhouse, I have these 3 column beds that are 48 inches, the 4 foot by 4 foot, basically. And then this is our main field map. So this is where everything is laid out in space and time. And that's sort of the master plan, or the final plan, I should say, because that's where everything is implemented into the field. But the place that I started is these two things. This is the field plan, and then this is the nursery plan, and they both correlate perfectly. I'll explain that in a minute. And then this is a seed order. This is actually my 2019 seed order. It's kind of, whenever I do a seed order, I usually start with my last year's seed order as a template and then just kind of adjust things. Because I won't need to get a lot of things here. I had a lot of this still in stock, but that's where I'll do that. Maybe that will be another video later on.